To achieve more advanced line work, we need to go beyond the idea of solid, continuous lines to outline the subjects that we're drawing, much as is happening here. Rather, we need to think of exploring the sorts of marks that we can make with our pen. Instead of going for practicing fixed patterns, such as we see here, a frequent exercise of beginners, which can then be frustratingly difficult to apply in real life, we're better off experimenting to see what sort of marks we can make with our pen, with the same pen. How we can go from darker, thicker lines to lighter, more fragmented ones. And the way I do this is by holding the pen lightly halfway down the barrel, holding it loosely, and changing whether I hold it more directly upwards or I angle the pen down. As I decrease the angle of the pen, I also increase the speed, and that seems to produce a nice light mark. Now, all these different marks give me more options for how to use them. So have a look at these series of steps that I'm drawing. The first one, I'm going to mirror that very first object that I drew. A worn step. There it is, just bare as it is. Let me try again, and this time I'm going to change the marks I use, not a continuous outline. How does that look? Does that give a little more sense of it being worn, of it being weathered? Yet I've used the same pen, I've used the same material. So let's try again. Now I'm going to use that first step, but I'm going to hatch it to give a stronger sense of a change of direction. How does that compare with the first or the second? Well, let's compare both approaches in the one and see what you think there. The straighter, unworn parts, and now some hatching, but I'm doing it differently. I'm going from the base up, which gives me a different effect at the end where I lift the pen off the paper. I'm going lighter. I'm getting a very different feel. What do you think? Which one feels more real? Which marks work better to create the effect of the worn step? Because that's what we're always doing. We're trying to create the effect of whatever we're seeing in life. And the more marks and ways of making them I have, the more tools I have. Let's try this with a different subject. 2 brick buildings, or at least 2 brick corners. So the first one, we're going to go with perhaps the more frequently seen way. Nice continuous ink lines, or fairly even, or nicely squared up. Nice pointy corners and edges and so forth. Could we make some changes to how we think of and use our marks? Well, firstly, let's not do those corners quite so hard and heavy. Let's keep a lighter touch with our lines, using our pen control and the greater options we know we have from it. Let's actually emphasize down the corner the fact that this isn't a solid line, but there are little indents in between the bricks, and some dots and some lighter patches can help indicate those. And even with the rows of bricks or stonework, I think it's going to be here, little dots help accentuate shadows in the corners. Let's try this with a tree. Here we see a very typical way of drawing trees. Good solid outline, overwhelmed by the detail of the leaves. So instead of trying to draw anything that's like a leaf, we add a pattern instead, and we often end up with this somewhat squiggly result. And then we'll add a little bit of hatching just for the trunk. Well, how might we rethink drawing a tree if we're thinking of our marks differently, if we have more options for how we use the pen, if we have more effects of ink on the paper we can create, and if we stop thinking of outlining shapes and think of putting marks on the paper and building them up, layering them to create a certain effect. Whatever effect we have in our reference, we have in front of us in life, or we have in our imagination, which is the case here with this tree. I'm trying to build up the effect of a tree canopy. I'm trying to build up the feel that some parts of this canopy are closer to me than others. It's not a cut-out silhouette sheet of paper of a pattern. Some parts are closer than other parts. The top of the canopy is probably the very furthest away part because it's curving away from me. With my marks on the trunk, I'm trying to give a sense of the shape. And of course, I'm trying to give a sense of the light hitting the tree that comes from a particular light source and therefore is consistent in the effect it has. I have playlists on drawing trees with, I think, a couple of hundred videos on it if trees are a problem. But thinking marks is the way to go. By using a wide variety of marks in this rural church scene, far greater ability to create the effect of the grasses with the shadows on them, the old brick church further away, the effect of the trees and the leaves with these silhouettes with the range of marks that I've used, as well as the hatching for the shaded, shadowed areas and creating a sense of the leaf texture. And also for these clouds, very light marks, both by using a lighter pen, a thinner pen than the one I used down here, but with the lightest touch possible, but all drawn with the same black ink. Here we see the brickwork created not by laboriously drawing in all of the, not so much bricks here as sandstone blocks, but by using light marks that just indicated hints and some of the areas where shadows would accentuate seeing the actual coursework. Sometimes this is also done by individually colouring some of the stones that are darker. But again, a range of heaviness in drawing the lines. There's no outline in this tree, but a series of marks, almost an edge formed by the hatching marks where they come up. No heavy outline, more consistency in the types of marks used in terms of the weight of the pen, but a great variety of length and type and combination and direction to create this Australian eucalyptus. And in this French village scene, being able to create the lovely thatched roof here, because we haven't rushed to do a heavy outline, but have done a series of smaller and very light marks to create the effect of this surface, this texture, these materials of a certain colour in the light. Again, no heavy outline, really just more a series of dots with some very loose hatching. By avoiding a heavy outline, we've avoided this cartoon-like effect, and we've been able to build up the range of marks we've learnt to make with our pen on the paper to create a far more realistic effect. And the paper we use also greatly affects the sorts of marks we can make. Copy paper, being a lot smoother, does not give the same range of variation as a paper that has a bit of a tooth. And the more the tooth, the rougher the paper, the more we can get a series of irregular deposits of ink when we lightly draw on that paper. Here are another series of steps that I drew earlier, a little more complicated than these, but really what I've drawn down here is very similar in principle to the effects that I've created with my edges here. By controlling the marks that I've used on the edge, I've been able to suggest a roundedness and at other times a sharpness by doing straight lines, doing more solid lines, sometimes just a series of dots. But by learning to combine a whole lot of different size shape marks, I can actually avoid outlining and create effect. And that lets me develop a far more advanced ink drawing technique that gives me far greater variety and subtlety in the sorts of pictures, scenes I can draw. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope you found this interesting. Why not try and vary your range of marks and learn to build them up in ways to create realistic effects that at this point you think are beyond you. Cartoon-like drawings are for the beginners. Let's start on the fun of learning to do more with our pen. But in the end, whatever you draw, however it turns out, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.